In the summer of 1911, some workers were digging up ground for the Northern Ontario Railway near the town of Timmins. They were going about the day like any other, working away, when all of a sudden they began to unearth what seemed to be the foundations of an old cabin. And not far away from the old stone foundations, they also came across several shallow graves. They had just found the remaining victims in a massacre that took place almost 100 years before. So, back in the day, people really liked beavers. Well, really, they liked their furs. They liked them so much that companies would pay men to go out into the wilderness to trap and hunt these adorable little guys, and then bring back their pelts to various locations to be made into coats and hats and whatever else you could make out of beaver fur. One of these companies is called the Hudson's Bay Company. Now, as far as I know, the company isn't involved in murdering cute little beavers for fancy hats anymore, so that's good. Nowadays, most people, they know the company as a clothing store named the Bay. The company is actually the oldest corporation in North America, and one of the oldest in the entire world. So its history is quite long and complex, so I won't get into it here, but just know by the time of our story, the company had been involved in the fur trade and also been establishing a bunch of little trading posts all around the northern Ontario wilderness for a good long while now. One of these little outposts was called the Frederick's House Trading Post, which was built on the Frederick House Lake. It was a man named Philip Turner who worked for the Hudson's Bay Company as a surveyor and map maker who established the post. Philip, he's actually quite important in Canadian history. He's kind of like the Lewis and Clark of Canada. He's credited for mapping out many of the river systems and forests in northern Ontario, as well as across Canada. It was in 1784 that Philip he first tried building a trading post right where the Abedi and Frederick's House rivers merged, but he found it too difficult. So, he moved around 50 miles south the next year and built the new trading post on Lake Waratoaha, which would later be named to Frederick House Lake. Over the years that the post was in operation, it was never able to become prosperous with all the other competition around, and having to deal with the long and difficult journeys through the woods and over rivers that were not as navigable as some of the other fur trading routes around. The post never achieved the level of importance that Philip Turner was hoping for. So, by the year of 1812, the Frederick's House, it hadn't really turned into much. It just was now sort of a pit stop for traders and their goods, making their way up to Moose Factory. And it was just before Christmas of that year that three men left the trading post and made the trip down to the cache on Lake Kenogamissi. Alexander Belly, Robert Sabiston, and Hugh Slater reached the cache and retrieved the beaver pelts and some of the other trade goods that had been stored there, and then on December 23rd made their way back to Frederick's house. These three men were never heard from again. It wasn't until the next spring, in March of 1813, when the commander at the cache, back on Lake Kenogamissi, a man named Richard Good, ordered two men to head up to Frederick's post to see if they could find out what had happened to the three missing fur traders. When the two men returned from the cache, John Knight and Charles Beads, they told Good what they had found. The whole trading post had been ransacked. All the goods, guns, and ammunitions gone. Not a trace of a living soul. Not even any cats, dogs, or even chickens were left on the property. But they did find the body of a dead native man and the body of a deceased native woman who they presumed to be his wife. Finding these bodies scared the two men off from searching any further, so they had returned back to Frederick's post, or back to the camp. Hearing this news, Richard, he decided to send a group of 4 armed men to Frederick's house to investigate further, and well, honestly see if there were any beaver pelts left to salvage. Now, the men, they didn't find any beaver pelts to sell, but they did find more dead people. First, they found the body of Hugh Slater out in the servant's house, and near that building, in a tent, they found a native man, a woman, and a baby, all deceased. They also came across the bodies of multiple dogs and cats around the property, but were unable to locate the two other missing men due to the amount of snow still on the ground. But after the snow was fully cleared in June, it was clear that something even more terrible had happened here over the winter. Alexander Belly and Robert Sabiston's bodies, they were found in shallow dug graves near the trading post, alongside 5 other unnamed native people. The rest of the trading post animals, they were all found killed as well. Each victim of the massacre, they had been shot at least once in the head. The bodies of a man and 3 children, they would be unearthed in 1911 by the Northern Ontario rail workers that we talked about in the beginning. That would finally put an end to this story almost 100 years later when they found the final victims. Now, the initial theory of what happened to these people was that a native man named Kapuskus and possibly his sister and other family members committed all these murders and then stole the supplies and goods from the trading post, and then they just disappeared into the far north, never to be seen again. But there is another story, one that comes from a forgotten princess of Canada. Maggie Buffalo LeClaire, the Princess of the North, born to a Chippewa Indian chief, Maggie was a badass lady, with some saying that she could skin a beaver faster than you could smoke a cigarette. Maggie had a 21-mile trap line that she maintained well into her 80s all by herself, and she was quoted saying, "I'm gonna die with my boots on." There's stories about how she would escape the old age home that she was forced into and make her way back to her lodge and hunting grounds on Kamoskosia Lake up near Timmins. Sadly, when she passed away, she was buried in the town of Timmins in the town cemetery, but in an unmarked grave, so her final resting place is unknown. But there was another thing about Maggie. She was a descendant of the only native family that survived that winter of death in 1812, and she had been told what had actually happened during those dark, cold winter months. Mary Buffalo, Maggie's ancestor, was 70 years old in 1932 when she told a man by the name of Dan O'Connor her story, which she had been told by her father when she was young. That summer, 2 native men from the Nighthawk Lake Band had made their way over to Lake Abiti, where they ran into some other natives. The 2 men, they proceeded to invite these people to the trading post on Frederick House Lake for a New Year's celebration later at the end of the year. And when the time came, 3 people from Lake Abiti, they decided to make the trek over to the trading post. A man, his wife, and their son. The 3 of them, they made their way to Frederick House Lake and began to cross over the frozen lake. But in the middle of doing so, a large storm hit them. As the storm continued to get worse and worse, the man and his son, they finally crossed the lake. They made it off the ice and reached the trading post. But the woman, she was nowhere in sight. And with the storm, the blizzard raging and night falling, the 2 men, they decided that it was too dangerous to go back out and look for her that night. When morning finally came to the father and son, alongside the man who ran the trading post, well, they went out in search for the woman, and it didn't take long for them to find her, standing, frozen to death, out in the middle of the lake. The father and son lost their minds. They began screaming how This must have been the work of an evil Nighthawk spirit, and then this must have been a plan to kill them all. They then turned their anger on the man from the trading post and killed him right there on the frozen lake. They then went back to the post and killed the man's wife who was staying there. After taking control of the post, the two men began to live off the supplies that were stored there. And since the trading post was perched upon a little hill, they could see anybody that was coming. And when they did, they would hide with their guns at the ready and then jump out and ambush and shoot and kill anybody that stopped at the trading post that winter. And then after finishing them off, they would bury their bodies in shallow graves. Now, most of the people killed in this massacre, they came from the Mataji band of natives, and all of the men from that band had been killed, except for one man. And that man was Brazel Buffalo, Mary's father. Brazel had one day actually gone over to the trading post, but when he arrived, he had seen blood covering the ground at the foot of the hill where the trading post was, and also saw a couple of bodies in the root house nearby. So he got spooked and went back to his home first before making his way over to the Bataji band of Indians, where they were hanging out at the time, where he confirmed with the woman left there that none of their husbands had come home over the winter after leaving for the Frederick's house post. After this, he sent word to the officials for the Hudson's Bay Company up in Moose Factory, and from there, they took over. A group of men hired by the Hudson's Bay Company was sent to the post to investigate the claims of Brazel, but when they got there, all they found was proof that something terrible had happened. There's no doubt about that. But the two men that had supposedly done this were nowhere to be found. But they did find a fresh set of tracks in the snow, so off they went in search of the two killers, and they followed the tracks until they stopped at a small waterfall, where they found the smoldering ashes of a fire. This meant that the men had to be close by, so they again picked up their pursuit. But when they reached Lake Abidi and a post that was there, like another small little trading post, they found nothing except an old missionary who told them that the two men had actually turned north at Lake Abidi and headed off into the wilderness, never to be seen again. Nobody knows what really happened that winter back in 1812. Only the forest will ever know. Do you think it was the native that they called Kapuskus, or do you believe more in Maggie's family story? I'm not sure myself. It seems like every family has some sort of crazy lore that may or may not be true. All I do know is that I would like to be able to be a beaver on the Frederick House Lake at that time, because maybe then I'd be able to tell you what really went down. But I'm not a beaver. Sadly, I'm just a man. And this man is telling you thank you for watching or listening, and have a good one.